In December 2010, while searching for a missing woman along a quiet stretch of coastline in Long Island, a police officer and his dog made a discovery that would transform a routine investigation into one of the most disturbing serial crime cases in modern American history. Hidden in the brush near Gilgo Beach were human remains. Within days, investigators uncovered more bodies along the same isolated highway. What began as a search for one missing person soon revealed a pattern of killings that had remained undetected for years. The investigation would become known as the case of the Long Island serial killer, a mystery involving multiple victims, unanswered questions, and a decades-long effort to identify the person responsible. The area where the discoveries were made lies along the southern shoreline of Long Island, a region known for its mix of suburban neighborhoods, coastal towns, and stretches of protected natural land. Just east of New York City, Long Island contains densely populated communities, as well as remote coastal landscapes where the Atlantic Ocean meets miles of barrier beaches. One of those coastal routes is the Ocean Parkway, a long highway that runs parallel to the shoreline. On one side are marshes and thick coastal brush. On the other, narrow barrier islands and beaches such as Gilgo Beach. Large portions of this roadway pass through quiet, undeveloped land with limited lighting and few nearby homes. During the day, the region is known for fishing, boating, and beach tourism. But certain sections of Ocean Parkway are isolated, particularly at night. The surrounding vegetation, dense reeds, scrub brush, and uneven terrain, can make parts of the area difficult to access without leaving the roadway. Nearby communities in Suffolk County had long been considered relatively typical suburban areas. Families commuted to work in surrounding towns or into New York City, and the beaches served as a recreational escape from the crowded metropolitan region. Before 2010, residents did not associate the quiet shoreline along Ocean Parkway with violent crime. The coastal brush and dunes were seen mainly as part of the natural landscape. That perception would change dramatically after the search for a missing woman led investigators into the dense vegetation near Gilgo Beach and uncovered evidence suggesting that multiple victims had been hidden there for years. The investigation that ultimately revealed the Gilgo Beach murders began with the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert. On May 1, 2010, Gilbert, a 24-year-old woman working as an escort, traveled to a gated community in Oak Beach to meet a client. According to records and witness accounts, she arrived shortly after midnight. At approximately 4:51 a.m., Gilbert placed a call to emergency services. The call to 911 lasted more than 20 minutes. During the call, Gilbert reportedly told the dispatcher that someone was trying to kill her. Exact details of the conversation have never been fully released to the public. Shortly afterward, Gilbert ran from the house where she had been staying. Witnesses in the neighborhood later reported seeing her knocking on doors and asking for help before running away again into the darkness. 16. After that moment, she disappeared. Police in Suffolk County began searching the area months later, focusing on the marshland and thick vegetation surrounding Ocean Parkway. On December 11, 2010, during one of those searches near Gilgo Beach, a police officer and a cadaver dog located human remains in the brush not far from the road. What investigators first believed might be the remains of Shannon Gilbert quickly proved to be something else entirely. Within days, authorities discovered 3 more sets of remains nearby. All 4 victims were women whose bodies had been wrapped in burlap and placed within a short distance of one another along Ocean Parkway. The discovery suggested something far more troubling than a single disappearance. Investigators now believed they had uncovered evidence of a serial killer operating along the Long Island coastline. As investigators expanded their search along Ocean Parkway, several unusual details began to emerge that made the case even more complex. The first 4 victims discovered near Gilgo Beach were all women who had worked as escorts and had advertised services online. Their remains had been carefully wrapped in burlap and placed in dense brush close to the highway. The proximity of the bodies suggested a deliberate pattern, indicating that whoever placed them there was familiar with the area. But as searches continued through early 2011, investigators began finding additional remains further along the same stretch of coastline. These discoveries did not follow the exact same pattern. Some victims had been dismembered. Others had been placed in locations that appeared more scattered than the first 4 bodies. In several cases, remains were discovered years apart in different places before being later matched through forensic analysis. These differences raised an important question for investigators. Were all of the victims connected to the same offender, or had multiple crimes occurred along the same remote stretch of shoreline? Another unusual element involved the time span between the deaths. Some of the remains found in the area appeared to date back many years, possibly to the late 1990s or early 2000s. This suggested that the person responsible might have been using the location for a long period without detection. The disappearance of Shannon Gilbert also added complexity to the investigation. Although her case initially led authorities to the area, investigators were uncertain whether her disappearance was connected to the other victims. In December 2011, Gilbert's remains were eventually located in a marsh near Oak Beach, not far from where she had last been seen. Authorities later stated that the circumstances of her death did not match the pattern observed with the other victims. The combination of differing methods, timelines, and victim circumstances created uncertainty within the investigation. What seemed at first like a single pattern of killings now appeared far more complicated, leaving investigators to determine whether they were dealing with one offender, multiple offenders, or several unrelated crimes discovered in the same place. After the discovery of multiple sets of remains along Ocean Parkway, the investigation expanded rapidly under the direction of the Suffolk County Police Department. Detectives began reviewing missing persons reports from across the United States, focusing particularly on women who had disappeared after working as escorts and advertising services online. By early 2011, investigators had identified 4 victims whose remains had been found close together near Gilgo Beach. These women became widely known as the Gilgo Four. Through forensic testing and DNA analysis, authorities eventually identified them as Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello, and Maureen Brainerd Barnes. Investigators also discovered an important pattern in the case involving phone communications. After Melissa Barthelemy disappeared in 2009, her younger sister received several disturbing phone calls from a man using Melissa's cell phone. According to reports, the caller contacted the family multiple times before eventually stopping. Authorities later determined that these calls had been placed from locations in Manhattan. However, the phone used was a prepaid burner phone, making it difficult to trace the individual responsible. Over the years, the investigation faced criticism and internal challenges. At one point, leadership of the inquiry changed following controversies surrounding James Burke, who later faced unrelated federal charges. Some investigators and journalists argued that these leadership issues slowed the progress of the case. Despite these difficulties, authorities continued reviewing evidence. Advances in forensic science, including DNA analysis and digital data review, allowed investigators to revisit material collected earlier in the investigation. In July 2023, after more than a decade of investigation, authorities announced the arrest of Rex Hoyerman, an architect from Massapequa Park. Prosecutors alleged that Hoyerman was responsible for the murders of several of the women whose remains had been discovered along Ocean Parkway. The arrest represented one of the most significant developments in the case since the remains were first discovered in 2010. However, investigators emphasized that the broader investigation into the killings and additional victims was still ongoing. As the discoveries along Ocean Parkway became widely known, communities across Long Island began to confront the possibility that a serial killer had operated in the region for years without being identified. For residents living near Gilgo Beach and neighboring coastal communities, the news was deeply unsettling. Areas once associated with recreation and tourism were now linked to a major criminal investigation. The quiet stretches of beach and marshland that bordered the highway took on a different meaning for many people who had lived nearby for decades. The case also had a profound impact on the families of the victims. Many had spent years searching for answers after their relatives disappeared, often with limited attention from authorities or the media. When the remains were finally identified, families were forced to confront both the confirmation of their loss and the reality that the crimes had remained unsolved for so long. Advocacy groups and community members also began raising broader concerns about how missing persons cases are investigated. Some critics argued that victims involved in escort work or other marginalized circumstances had historically received less immediate attention from law enforcement. Public discussion about the case spread beyond Long Island, becoming a national topic in news coverage and investigative reporting. Documentaries, podcasts, and journalistic investigations examined the timeline of the killings and questioned whether earlier connections between cases might have been missed. The case also led to renewed calls for improved coordination between police departments when investigating missing persons who may have traveled across different states. Several of the victims had last been seen in locations outside New York, making the investigation more complex. For the communities surrounding the South Shore of Long Island, the discovery of multiple victims left a lasting impression. What had once seemed like isolated disappearances were now understood as part of a larger and deeply troubling pattern, one that raised questions about how long the crimes had gone undetected. From the beginning of the investigation, authorities considered the possibility that the remains discovered near Gilgo Beach were connected to a single offender. The similar placement of several victims along Ocean Parkway and the method in which some of the bodies were wrapped suggested a deliberate pattern. Investigators focused especially on the 4 victims known as the Gilgo Four, whose remains were discovered close together in December 2010. The similarities in their cases, including their work as escorts and their use of online advertising platforms, led authorities to believe that the perpetrator may have contacted victims through the internet. Evidence collected during the investigation indicated that communication between the victims and potential clients often occurred through disposable prepaid phones. This made identifying suspects more difficult, since such devices can be purchased without providing personal information and are often discarded after use. Over time, investigators also examined whether the additional remains discovered along the South Shore of Long Island were connected to the same offender. However, differences in the condition of some remains and the time periods in which the victims disappeared led authorities to consider the possibility that more than one person could have been responsible for crimes in the area. In July 2023, the investigation took a major turn when prosecutors charged Rex Heuermann in connection with several of the Gilgo Four victims. According to court documents, investigators used a combination of cell phone data, vehicle information, and DNA evidence to identify him as a suspect. Prosecutors stated that electronic records linked a cell phone used by the suspect to locations associated with communications with the victims. In addition, investigators reported that DNA recovered from evidence in the case was consistent with genetic material connected to members of Heuermann's household. Authorities emphasized that the charges related specifically to several of the victims found near Gilgo Beach. The investigation into other remains discovered along Ocean Parkway and nearby areas has continued as investigators work to determine whether those cases are connected. As of today, the investigation into the killings connected to Gilgo Beach remains active and continues to evolve. In July 2023, authorities in Suffolk County announced the arrest of Rex Heuermann, an architect from Massapequa Park. Prosecutors charged Heuermann in connection with several of the victims known as the Gilgo Four. According to court filings, investigators relied on a combination of cell phone records, location data, and DNA analysis to build the case. Hair evidence recovered from burlap used in the disposal of victims was also examined through modern forensic testing. Heuermann has pleaded not guilty to the charges filed against him. As the legal process continues, prosecutors have indicated that additional evidence has been reviewed and further charges have been discussed in connection with other victims discovered along the Long Island coastline. Authorities have also reopened aspects of the broader investigation. New task forces within the Suffolk County Police Department have re-examined older evidence, digital records, and previously overlooked leads. Investigators have also used modern forensic techniques, including advanced DNA analysis and genetic genealogy, to reassess material collected during earlier stages of the case. While the arrest marked a significant development after more than a decade of uncertainty, officials have made it clear that not every question surrounding the discoveries along Ocean Parkway has been answered. Several victims discovered in the area are still part of ongoing investigations. and authorities continue working to determine whether all of the remains found along the shoreline are connected to the same offender or to multiple crimes occurring over different periods. For investigators and families alike, the case remains one of the most complex serial murder investigations in the history of Long Island. The discoveries along Ocean Parkway changed how many people view the quiet shoreline of Long Island. What began as a search for one missing woman eventually exposed a series of crimes that had remained hidden for years in the brush near Gilgo Beach. The investigation revealed not only the existence of multiple victims, but also the challenges law enforcement faces when cases stretch across jurisdictions, involve vulnerable populations, and unfold over long periods of time. For the families of the victims, the case has been defined by patience and persistence. Many spent years advocating for attention to their missing relatives long before the remains were discovered. Even as new developments emerge, the emotional impact of the crimes continues to shape the lives of those who lost loved ones. The arrest of Rex Heuermann has provided investigators with a possible path toward answers in some of the killings. Yet the broader investigation into the remains found along the south shore of Long Island is still ongoing, and authorities continue working to determine how many cases may ultimately be connected. The story of the Gilgo Beach murders is not only about one suspect or one stretch of coastline. It is about the victims whose lives ended there, and the communities that were forced to confront a hidden pattern of violence. Years after the first discovery in 2010, the investigation continues, a reminder that even long-buried crimes can resurface, demanding accountability and truth.